Hey there, and welcome to Enter the Terminal, episode 29. I'm Eric, the IT guy Hendricks, and joining me, as always, is my trusty co host, Mr. Scott McBrien. Today, we're going to be talking about how to customize your shell. We've been using a lot of different commands and different layouts for our terminal, but how do we get more out of our terminal? How do we get it to work more in the way that we feel like it should work? So I thought, Scott, today we could start out by setting some custom aliases. A lot of times we use the same commands over and over again with the same arguments, so we can actually set up different ways to run those customized commands with just almost like a shortcut.
Sure. Do you want to see what we already have on the system in terms of aliases?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So in your home directory, so that's /home/ your username. In this case today we're Joe. There is a configuration file called .bashrc, and so we can actually use the alias command with no arguments to give a list of what aliases are currently set at the system level and at the user level.
And
So
so
do you want to? Yeah, do you want to
you might
walk
be
us through a
interested
couple of
in
these?
something like LL. Oh, actually, let's go to, let's see, LL is a long list, um, and L dot, it lists just the current working directory. Um, Actually, that doesn't look like what it is. Let's see, alias. So L dot, oh, lists the hidden files in the current directory. But the other thing that's interesting is this guy. Notice that all of the LS aliases, including one called LS, includes this option of dash dash color equal auto, and that's what causes all of our files and directories and stuff to have that color in the output that tells us their type. If we just run normal LS in this directory, right, backslash, says don't use an alias. Notice there's no colorization at all. But if I use the aliased ls, then I get my nice colors that I'm used to.
I use LL and color equals auto religiously. In fact, anytime I log into a system without that, it's just like, oh my gosh, what's happened?
Yeah, and you can see that here when you set the alias, you tell it what you want to run on the command line, right? This is your thing you want to type. And then on the other side of the equals is the command that should really be executed when you type this shortcut. So Eric,
So one of the
what alias do you want to add?
definitely one of the other options that I use with LS, and this may actually already be in place, but we can give it a try, is the H option. So what that does is when you do a listing of your files, it will actually it'll actually show the listing in more human readable format. So instead of trying to calculate what 167,423 bytes is, it'll actually convert that into megabytes or gigabytes. So it makes it very easy to go through and look and see what the largest files in a directory are. So I like to use the -L and the -H option together. So if we create an alias, and what this will do is it'll actually overwrite the existing alias to then include the long listing, color, and the human readable format.
And am I using the right capitalization of H there, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So one, we can see that we have overwritten our alias, and then if we run it, there is your human-friendly format.
So there's two different levels of aliasing. There's system level, so things that are true across the entire instance of your operating system, but there's also user level, so we can actually change this per user. So why don't we take a quick look at the bash rc file and see what.
We might want to hold that off until after the transition because we're going to start diving into a whole bunch of different files. Um, I wonder if we should instead touch quickly on variables, and then we could talk about
Hmm,
persisting them after the transition.
perfect. Yeah, I like that plan. Um, so you can actually use variables at the command line. So if you're going to use a similar Occasionally, I'll use this if I'm running commands on a remote system. I'll actually create a temporary variable that says server equals XYZ. That way, I can just go ahead and just use just use server and rerun the same commands over and over again.
Yeah,
So what
and
that
if you
what
use the set command, that will show you all of the variables set in your. It also shows you your functions. So hold on. Clear, set less. So this shows you all the variables and their settings. And we talked about this, I think, in one of our previous episodes on Bash shell scripting. But one that is of interest might be PS1. So Eric, what is PS1?
So PS1 is actually what you see on to the left of the cursor. So that allows you to set certain information to be available on different systems. I remember years ago that PS1 used to give you the full absolute path to your current location. That became a little untenable, especially with smaller resolution screens. So nowadays PS1 is just set to your current working directory. So if we kind of break this down a little bit, you see a /u, which gives us our username. You see /h, which gives us our host name, and then /W is the current working directory. So we need to use those slashes in order to escape those characters. Otherwise, we could literally print a u at h. So we need to escape those characters so that the system knows that those are actually special characters. And then we get our $sign to indicate that we're a user and not a root account.
Yeah, and so what we're looking at there is the string that builds your primary system prompt. And if we look at PS2, that's your secondary system prompt. So if we're typing a command, and you use a backslash to escape your return character, it opens up the secondary system prompt. That's PS2. And then you can hit enter at the end, and it runs it as though it's a single line. So these are the variables that kind of control the look and feel of your shell. So Eric, if we wanted to change back to your old preference of complete working directory,
Oof.
we could do something like this. Actually, let me echo PS1 so I can look at what it is and get all the spacing and stuff right. On my first go, I think that is right. All right, so if I go deeper, like etc profile.d, right, it takes using that lowercase w token, it will use the entire prompt. But then if I go even deeper, I can't go, oh, that's because it's a different directory, right? It'll just keep making that prompt longer and longer because we keep adding more and more directories to it. So it can be pretty untenable if you're not careful.
Right.
And I think there is a man page where they talk about all the tokens that you can use in your prompt. I'll have to see if I can find it, maybe put it in the show comments.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Why don't we cut on over to the next segment, and we'll get in a little bit deeper to some of these things. All right. So what we talked about in the top of the show really helps customize our experience and make things easier to use. The downside is everything we've done to this point is not permanent. So if we were to log out at this point, we'd lose all the changes that we were going to. We'd lose all the changes that we went ahead and added. So we log out of Joe, and then we try and look at PS1, and it's back to a capital W. So there's a couple of different configuration files that we could look into. And I mentioned at the top of the show that there's sort of two levels of customization. There's system level, so it would change for all users, and then there's user customizations after that. So if we go into the Etsy profile.d directory and do a long listing, we can actually see some of the different configuration files that are there.
And I think one of the ones that you probably want to just take a quick look at is something like this. Oops, cat. Right, so at the beginning of the show, we were talking about these aliases we already had set in the environment, and look, lo and behold, in this script, there they are.
Let's see. I think that's kind of it from Etsy profile. A lot of this gets set at the user level, but it is nice to know that you can change that long listing across the entire system.
So I will say that the tie-in between user configurable changes and system configurable changes is a bit wonky, right? Usually when we look at things, it's like system stuff happens, then user stuff happens. And because user stuff happens last, you can make changes there and it will persist and rewrite the system stuff. But that's not always the case with profiles because of how the different shell scripts that are setting these things up are called, right? So and then also, what do you put in the different types of shell files? So there's two different types. There's profiles and there's RCs. And there's actually a differential between what we want to put in one thing and what we want to put in the other. So profiles are for variables, and RCs are for running commands. So if you want to change your PS1 environment variable, right? That's a profile change. And then as the administrator of the machine, you can decide whether you want to make that change for all users or you want to make that change for individual users down in their home directory settings. For things like aliases, where we're running a command called alias to set this alias, that goes in the RC. And again, as the administrator, you get to choose whether you want to do this at the system level of where RCs are executed, or you want to do it at the user configuration level where RCs are executed. And that's one is a little wonky. Eric, do you mind if I just like go through the order of operations here?
Yeah, please do.
All right. The order of operation. Let me just edit a file real quick. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to run Etsy profile, and then we will probably run Etsy profile.d, all those shell scripts. And then we're going to go into the user's home directory and run their .bash underscore profile. And then from within the bash profile, it actually makes a call to execute the user's bash RC.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look at the bash RC, it actually makes a call back out to the profile.d directory. And so this is one of the weird things. This is when you log into the system. So this is what we do to establish what we call a login shell, one that instantiates your session with the system. But when you run shell scripts or you create windows in your graphical environment that are shell windows, those are not login shells, right? You're not authenticating to the system in order to generate those. So for those, we do this flow. So for those, we only execute RCs. We don't execute the profiles, which set variables. And that's because a lot of the variables that we set at login time are exported. And exporting means that they are passed to the operating parameters of child processes invoked from that shell. So things like our PS1 variable is exported, and every shell session we make from that login shell will get the same PS1 settings passed to it. So we don't need to re-execute the profiles, but there's no way to export the running of a command, and that's why the RCs are re-executed every time you open up a new shell. And that's one of the weird things and why we have this differentiation between where we set variables, because variables can be exported to subshells and subprocesses, and where we run commands for the environment, because those actually have to be re-executed every time we instantiate a new environment. All right, so that's kind of the flow, and let me just in here non-login, and then up here this is login shells. All right. And so if we're looking at a login shell and we take a look at etc profile, notice it tells you very quickly, oh, by the way, if you're defining functions and aliases, you should go over here. etc profile is not the right place for running those commands. Also, there's a little preamble here like, don't mess this file up because it gets run for everyone every time they log into the system. All right. And then down here, they do this, they define a couple of functions. This one's called path lunge. It's what builds the path environment variable. And then down here, it's like, oh, if you're the root user, then you should get sbin and user local sbin on your path. But if you're not root, you shouldn't get those things. All right. And then down here we have a host name, hist size. So Eric, I know that on a previous show we talked about using the history in the shell. We remember the last 1,000 commands by default. This is why, because the hist size is set to 1,000 for every user. And then I said that, oh, we go into etc profile.d and we run all the things there. This little for loop that says go into etc profile.d and run all the shell scripts is why that happens. And then that's pretty much it. So then we go over to etc profile.d, which we've already seen. Right, and execute all these. And then we go into the user's home and we execute .bash profile. And it's not very interesting out of the box. It, in fact, just calls RC. And then RC sets a variable, which I actually think should be over in profile instead. But and then over here it says, oh, and also go into and run the specific aliases and functions that might be in this bashrc.d directory somebody might have. So if we wanted to add a variable, right, like we want to customize our shell prompt all the time. Yeah. We would go into the bash profile, and then down here at the bottom where it says user-specific environment and startup programs, we could say ps1 equals quote, user at host long directory $ space. And in fact, you know what we're going to do is we're going to also preface this with export. I know that PS1 has been tagged as an exported variable earlier on somewhere in the login process, but if I was doing individual definitions, like new variable definitions, you probably want to export it so those subshells and subprocesses will get that change. Right. And then if we want to set our override to the LL alias, we can come into the bash RC, and then down here at the very bottom, we can alias LL equals ls-lh dash color equals auto. Right, that's the one you like, Eric?
Yep.
Okay. And because we're putting that at the bottom and the other scripts that are called kind of come out of the middle, whatever's done last is persistent. So let me exit this shell, and I'm going to come back in as that person. And we should see those changes. All right, so when I change directories, it's giving me the full directory, because if I look at S1, right, we get that lowercase w, which we set. And if I do an LL here, I'm getting the human readable size, because I look at the set aliases, right, my user level override of the system settings has persisted because of where I place it in that file. So placement is important. If I had placed this higher up in the file, it may have been re-overrided by running things out of etc profile.d. So you want to exercise a little bit of caution in where you put things. And I see Shantanu is talking about single quote versus double quote. Okay, so you'll notice that here in the aliases, we're using single quotes. When I was making changes in my profile, I use single quotes. Quoting is, there are three quoting characters that come with the shell: single quote, double quote, and backslash. So backslash will quote or escape the special meaning of a single character that follows it. Double quotes will escape the special meaning of things that fall within those double quotes, except dollar signs, exclamation points, backslashes, and something else that I'm forgetting. And then single quotes escape the special meaning of everything within it. So notice that in my prompt, I was using a dollar sign. And usually a dollar sign is an indicator that we're going to reference a variable. But in this instance, we want to make sure that there was literally a dollar sign character that was a component of our prompt. So I used single quotes to make sure that everything inside of those single quotes was literally treated as a character, didn't have any of the special meanings on shell world of like variables or embedded execution or things like that. So that's why I use the single quotes here, not doubles. If I did do a double quote, I think we would get a wonky thing we didn't expect. All right, so by using double quotes, this dollar sign is going to be interpreted as the beginning of a variable reference, and then we can see that there's actually no variable name, so it should just be like null. And then what we'll end up with is our prompt will be square bracket user at host working directory square bracket and then a blinking cursor, right? So we're going to miss that dollar sign at the end. All right, and we can test that by just doing a relog in. Oh, that didn't break the way I expected.
Interesting. Is that pulling from? Hmm.
Oh,
So because that line's broken, did it just pull from Etsy profile?
well, the line's not broken. Like it is syntactically correct. But it's weird that it didn't interpret that dollar sign for me. I don't know. I know in the past I have broken it in this way, so maybe it's something with the shell interpreter has changed slightly for like variables or something like that. But when we're doing something like, hold on, Let me give you a more concrete example that we just run on the command line. All right, so notice I'm doing this in double quotes. Double quotes will escape the special meanings of some things, most things, but not everything, including dollar signs, right? And notice that it went ahead and honored that dollar variable reference and printed out the host name that was enclosed in those doubles. But if I do a single, which escapes all the special meanings of everything within it, right? It did not do that variable reference lookup and actually printed that string. And then the alternate way we could do it is something like this. So here we're using doubles to escape the special meaning of things like spaces and stuff like that. But then notice in front of the dollar sign, I put a backslash, which says escape the special meaning of the single character that follows. So instead of this dollar sign being a start of a variable name, we're saying literally, I want this to be a dollar sign. And then host name after that doesn't have any special meaning, so it gets printed as a string. So, and I
So
could also do.
I've used syntax like that in the past to if I want to log the results of a script or something. What you can do is escape the dollar sign. That way you can say my variable x equals and then the actual value of x. So that comes in handy when you're debugging to be able to say, okay, so this variable is set to this, and maybe I broke something in a for loop somewhere. It helps you troubleshoot quite a bit.
Yeah. And if I use all backslashes, you just have to be really liberal with the application of backslashes, right? Because if I don't use the backslashes and I just use the space characters, oh, that actually worked anyway, thanks to Echo. But if I did something like ls, it's going to interpret each one of those things as a separate argument, because usually when things are separated by spaces on the command line, it means individual arguments being passed to the thing on the command line. Whereas if I escape it all, it treats it as a single string, right? Because those spaces are embedded into the file name that we're giving ls. That was quite a detour that we took there. I did want to cover one other pretty common use case. So I've got this application that I installed called My App, and it has all of its binary stored in the My App bin directory. Right there it is. But if I run My App, it doesn't work. And why is that, Eric?
That comes into play with an issue with path.
Yeah. So if we look at the path variable, this is the list of directories on which we should look for executables put onto the command line. So if we use the fully qualified name or fully qualified path name, we'll be able to execute this command because we're telling the shell exactly where to find this file that it needs to pick up and execute. But if we just reference the command name, it's going to look in this list of directories. And notice that opt my app bin is not in my list of directories that I would check. So another really common thing that people will do for customizing their shell is adding additional directories to their path environment variable. And Eric, if we're setting a variable, where should it go?
In bash underscore profile.
Very good. So if we take a look at bash underscore profile, and we set up our PS1 variable there, we're also going to do a, export path equal. So what we're doing is we're setting the path environment variable to its old settings, plus adding :opt my app bin. Okay, so I'm going to log
Yeah,
out.
don't
Actually, I'm
forget to
just going to
reference the
force it.
old path before you change it. Not that I've ever
That's
made that
true.
mistake before.
All right, so we're going to echo path. All right, so notice that over here, we've got that new directory that we added. And now when I run my app, right, you'll recall that up here, when I ran my app, it said command not found. But now that I've added that directory to my path, it's able to successfully execute that program. So this is a pretty common thing to do for third-party applications because they'll put themselves in their own directory structure somewhere instead of in user bin or user sbin. So you may have to adjust your path to add it so that you can natively reference the executables provided by that additional software.
So I think we've covered all the questions in chat, and we kind of covered a lot of the major pieces of it, and we should. The question is my app open source? I mean that's a big concern there. But
Well, it's a shell script, so yes, sure.
And I really like the way you laid out that text file. Trying to explain the login process is somewhat tedious. So it's been nice. It was nice to see that in a visual format of it goes here, it jumps back over here, and then so definitely share this episode with a bunch of folks. Like, share, subscribe, all the usual things. In fact, we are going to make some changes to the schedule coming up. So we've had a lot of folks let us know that Thursdays are a little bit chaotic. People have meetings and work events and that kind of thing. So what we're going to try and do here in a few weeks is we're going to shift the showtime of this of our show over to Fridays around lunchtime. So we're going to target 12 p.m. Eastern. So if you're on lunch, you should be able to join us live. Same place, the RHEL YouTube channel. It'll still be Scott and I doing Into the Terminal, so that part isn't changing. There is one other change to our schedule. When we move to the new date and time, we're going to be dropping dark mode. I know for a few of you that's going to be devastating, but we're going to spin down dark mode, and we're going to try and make the one session more accessible to more people. So starting on June 30th will be our last episode of Dark Mode, and then July 8th will be the first Friday. And follow us on social media. We're at RHEL. Look for the hashtag Into the Terminal, and that way we'll make plenty of announcements of new showtimes and when to join us. Excuse me. And then, in fact, next week we've got an episode I'm really excited about. We'll be deploying virtual machines. So we can do that from the command line. We can do that from the web console. Your local system with a Red Hat Enterprise Linux virtual machine is a great way to interact with RHEL and try things out. Or in my case, run Minecraft servers and Plex servers and all those kinds of things. Scott, did I leave anything out?
I don't think so. I was just responding to Shantanu's question about the directionality of path. So in our example, I put the op directory at the end of path, and that was very explicit because that list of directories you see in the path is the order in which they're checked. So if you have an ls command in bin and you have an ls command in opt my app bin, when we go to look at path, the first occurrence that we find is where it stops looking and executes the command from. So I always add additional directories to the end of my path so that they're checked after all the system locations like bin and sbin and user bin. Otherwise, you can get weird things like somebody ships you something that overwrites your or is not the command you're looking for, but is named the same thing and ends up like messing with your system in a way you didn't expect.
That's a great point. All right, so be sure to like this episode, share it with a friend. There's a lot of amazing things you can do with modifying your shell. So if you just go out and search for modifying the bash shell, there's a lot of tips and tricks. We'll include a few links in the show notes. Be sure to like and subscribe, and definitely continue the conversation in the episode comments. Scott and I and the RHEL team are good about coming in after these episodes are posted and checking for your questions and providing additional resources. So, on behalf of Scott McBrien, myself, and the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you so much for joining us for Into the Terminal, episode 29, and we'll see you next time.